House of EdTech, Episode 28.
Hello there, this is Rich Kiker, Director of Online Learning at Palisade School District and Google Trainer. You're listening to the House of EdTech with Chris Nesi.
This episode of House of EdTech is brought to you by todaysmeet.com. Welcome to the House of EdTech podcast. I am your host, Christopher Nesi, and the House of EdTech podcast explores how technology is changing the way teachers teach and the impact that technology is having in education. My objectives include discussing technology that is changing our classrooms and schools and sharing information you can hear about today and use tomorrow. I talk to teachers, leaders, and creators like you and have them share their stories. The purpose being, whether you use it or not, technology is changing the way we teach and how our students learn. Hey, thanks for stopping back in here to the House of EdTech. I'm so excited you decided to join me. If you're a returning listener, thank you for coming back. I appreciate it. And if this is your first episode of the podcast, thank you for tuning in. I'm so glad you decided to check it out. This is going to be a really, really great episode. I have some really great content. And for the first-time listeners, because I think it's important as a podcaster to not assume that you've been here before or that you have listened to all 28 episodes so far. So a little bit about what I do here. My segments include my EdTech Thought, my EdTech Recommendation, and the House of EdTech VIP. The EdTech Thought is where I share my own opinion. It's kind of like an editorial, whether it's something I thought of on my own or if I see something in what I read on the internet, and I just like to share that out with you, the listener. My EdTech Recommendation. Each episode, I like to recommend a tool or tools, whether it's an app or a website, something that can be useful in your teaching or for your students that I find valuable and that I think you might find value in. And the House of EdTech VIP, well, that's a lucky individual who I like to recommend that you follow on Twitter, check out their website, their blog, and I like to highlight some of their accomplishments in education and also what they're doing with education technology. In previous episodes, some of those VIPs have turned into guests, so you get to hear a little bit about them in one episode, and then, I bring them back, or I'm lucky enough to get to talk to them and share their story in much greater detail. So that's what the House of EdTech VIP is all about. Now, in this episode, my featured guest is Tom Murray, and if you know Tom, you know Thomas C. Murray on Twitter, and he is really at the forefront of a movement that's kind of sweeping the nation here in 2015, and that's the Future Ready initiative. So I got to sit down and talk with Tom all about Future Ready and a number of other really great topics related to EdTech and education, and we kind of went all over the place. But a bulk of the content is all about Future Ready. So if you're curious about Future Ready, you are in the right place. And speaking of the right place, I'm really proud to say that my website, chrisnesi.com, was named one of the best education blogs to follow in 2015. And this really great honor was bestowed upon my website by Exam Time. I'll link to their blog post with the other websites in the show notes for this episode, again, number 28. And for those of you that aren't familiar with Exam Time, here's a bonus House of EdTech recommendation. Exam Time's goal is simple. They want to change the way that you learn. And when I say you, that's you and your students. Exam Time is changing the way students learn by providing free study tools for students and teachers. Check out their website at www.examtime.com. That's all I have for now. So let's dive right into my conversation with Tom Murray. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, my featured guest in this episode is Tom Murray. Tom is a former school principal who currently serves as the State and District Digital Learning Policy and Advocacy Director for the Alliance of Excellent Education, which is based in Washington, D.C. He works alongside state education departments, corporations, and school districts throughout the country implementing digital learning. As a result of his wealth of experience in K-12 digital leadership, he has been recognized at the national level for implementing one-to-one, BYOD, and blended learning programs. He has been featured in Tech and Learning magazine, Forbes.com, The Journal, and many other publications. Tom is also the founder of the popular EdTech hashtag chat on Twitter, where hundreds of educators from around the world discuss digital learning every Monday night. Welcome to the House of EdTech, Tom Murray.
Thanks so much. It is an absolute pleasure to be here and excited to talk about Future Ready and some other initiatives we have going on around the nation. Thanks for having me.
And as we just said in our little pre-discussion, Future Ready is really the tip of the iceberg with you.
Yeah, it really is. We've got a lot going on in Washington. And, it's been quite the learning experience going from the classroom level to being a building principal and all the incredible aspects of running a school and working with teachers to then moving to be a tech director and kind of doing some behind the scenes things and then having the ability to implement lots of different initiatives at a district level here in Pennsylvania to now working at the federal level. Quite the change, but it was something I was geared up and ready for and excited to do.
And exciting it is. And I don't know how much higher you can climb in terms of education in this country.
It's exciting. We, in the new role, I have a large opportunity to work with Congress, to work with the Senate, work with the White House, U.S. Department of Education on truly transforming schools. And what's exciting about it for me is it's not a left thing or a right thing when it comes to the politics of it all. It's a kid-centered thing. And so, I'll work alongside Republicans, alongside Democrats, to really hone in on what can we do for kids and how can we transform this system to support teachers and empower teachers, but to truly get to where kids are and to help and benefit the future of our country. So some of the work takes me from things like working with Chairman Wheeler and the FCC on E-rate and E-rate modernization and supporting schools in that realm to this whole aspect of Future Ready, which is one of the main projects we have going on right now.
So you mentioned Future Ready. This is big in December and even before that, and now it's really taking hold here in 2015. Talk a little bit about what the initiative is all about.
Sure. Future Ready is exciting. It is an incredible opportunity for school districts. I think when we look at why is there a need for something, we've got enough initiatives in education. Every year teachers come back to their school districts and they kind of they're anticipating what's new this year, what's the new initiative this year, and all across the country we've got this initiative, that initiative, and this is just one we've seen unparalleled and unprecedented support for from organizations around the country, truly like never before in an educational initiative. And I don't say that lightly. I'll get into a little bit some of the coalition partners in just a little bit. The goal behind Future Ready is to transform schools, to really help personalize learning for kids, to empower teachers. And what I mean by that is to take a look at things like differentiated professional learning and to empower teachers in that regard, to take a look at students and student voice. And so much of this aspect of things does revolve around technology, but I will say that Future Ready is not a technology-first initiative. It is a learning-first initiative where technology plays a key role in that. So to give you a little premise behind all of Future Ready, it is the brainchild of the U.S. Department of Education, but they are not going at it alone. With that being said, they reached out to the Alliance for Excellent Education, where I currently work, to be a strategic partner in all this and help quarterback these efforts. So the goal is to take the classrooms of yesteryear, where you have kids sitting in rows facing forward, a teacher standing up front, teacher desk is up front, teacher gives information, kids regurgitate it back, which was so prevalent in the 50s, in the 60s, in the 80s, and I would say and still in some schools today, to one where there's collaboration and kids are working in groups and kids are working with people all around the world and they're problem solving. Maybe it's project-based learning. Maybe it's moving forward through the use of personalization and technology and what technology can do to really support students. Because what's out there is absolutely incredible, but districts need support with this. They need high-octane leaders willing to push the envelope and say, we're going to do this differently. They need support from things like broadband and infrastructure. They need to understand how do we get away from the sit and get top-down, one-size-fits-all approach to something like professional learning to one where teachers are empowered and making decisions and growing. And something like professional learning is job embedded in part. It's cultural. It's something that occurs every day, not just a few handful of days a year. To taking a look at different aspects of curriculum. If we're in a curriculum cycle where all we do is replace our math books every 8 years and our social studies books every 7 years, we're missing the boat, because with that, things are constantly changing. And we obviously live in this world where data and information and all of that is in real time. But yet so many times our schools aren't living in real time. That doesn't come up for 5 more years and we'll think about it then. how do we transform that traditional system into one that is flexible, one that is fluid, one where teachers are empowered to make decisions? And we believe Future Ready can do that. So the United States Department of Education reached out to the Alliance for Excellent Education and said, will you partner with us in this and build a coalition of organizations that believes in EdTech, that believes in things like privacy for kids, that believes in empowering teachers, that believes in the role of parents and the significant role that they play, that believes in the leadership side of we need very dynamic leaders that are empowering the people that are around them to transform the system. And we said absolutely yes. So what the Department of Ed did is they put out the Future Ready Pledge. They put this out in August, and when they released it, between August and November, where we had a summit at the White House, which I'll talk about in a moment, there was 1,200 superintendents around the nation that signed on to this pledge. And the pledge says things like, we're going to foster and lead a culture of digital learning in our schools, and we're going to help schools and families transition to things like high-speed connectivity, and we're going to empower educators through professional learning opportunities, and those types of things. And superintendents read that and said, we stand behind that. We believe in this, and we're going to work in our district to support this. So when the Department of Education put that out, we had 1,200 signatures up until November 19th. And what was significant about November 19th is here we had the President of the United States kicking this initiative off at the White House as an extension of Connect Ed. And if you're familiar with the Connect Ed initiative, that was something the President had kicked off where he reached out to businesses around the world and around the country, and said, how can you support us with this? How can you help our schools, businesses take a leadership role? And we see organizations like Apple and those types stepping up and saying, we're going to support schools, and this is how we're going to do that. But we all know it's not just about ed tech. One of the crises we have in our nation right now is we have districts that are out there. They're buying all of this stuff. And I don't care if they're Chromebooks or iPads or laptops. I don't care what they are. They're buying this stuff. They're bringing it in. They're putting it in hallways. They're putting it in the hands of teachers and saying, now what do we do with it? And when we look at the vast transformation of that in and of itself is not going to do anything. I think kids will, they'll learn sometimes in spite of our poor planning. But the premise behind Future Ready is to help us plan for that progress, to help us plan before we buy, because that crisis can be averted. And I know, and I've been that tech director that at the end of the year, hey, we have a little bit of extra money. Why don't we get some additional resources? It comes out of a good mindset of wanting to provide. But what happens is you do not get your bang for your buck. And every dollar we spend as a school district needs to be spent well because it's coming out of the pocket of a taxpayer. And so we need to make sure we're using that well. So Future Ready is geared to help districts redesign themselves, to plan before they buy, to empower the teachers that are the best resources that districts have within the district with high octane leaders, so that at the end of the day, we can do better things for kids who will have more opportunities and higher success if we do this well. The Future Ready Pledge, which I mentioned, I would encourage any of our listeners to talk to their superintendents about it. You can find that at futurereadyschools.org, and there's a big spot, Take the Pledge. And we're encouraging superintendents to put their necks out there and say, we believe in this as a district, and we're going to stand behind it. And up to date, we've had a lot more. I'm not going to share currently publicly yet about how many, because we're going to be doing that at the summits, which I'll talk a little about. But in asking a little bit about Future Ready, that's a little bit of an intro for you.
I think you just opened the door to I need to break this up into like a 7-part series over the next half year. To hit on a couple of things that you said. One, when you talk about having a plan before we buy technology in schools, I think that's crucial. And the example I'll share with you is I had a discussion this week on Twitter, and I can basically summarize this discussion as the $300 Chromebook versus the $900 laptop. And I know here in New Jersey with park testing, a lot of schools are now purchasing Chromebooks or laptops. And a friend of mine in a district I won't name made known to me that, hey, we just bought, 1,300 laptops, and they're these great HP laptops, and they were about $900 a piece. And we don't have enough to let them do anything other than be available for testing during test time here in the state of New Jersey. And I just said, well, why didn't they get Chromebooks? And my friend told me, oh, well, in my district, our tech director is anti-Google, and because he can't put Microsoft Office on these Chromebooks, they're not valuable to him. And so basically what happens is now they have not enough laptops, and they could have bought, 2-to-1, 3-to-1, even 4-to-1, depending on the Chromebook, could have purchased a lot more technology and made more use of it.
Yeah, I could tell you story after story of things like that. One of the examples I'll give is go to many conferences, and when people start talking about initiatives that they're doing, they lead with the device. They start talking about one-to-one, or we have all of these Chromebooks, or we have all of these iPads. And I like to say, I don't care, because it's not about that. We need to be talking about learning, and we need to talk about how are we personalizing this for kids, and how is what we're doing very deeper. I like looking at things like the SAMR model or the TPAC model, which a lot of districts I think need to take a look at, because what I'm seeing related to digital learning around the nation is just because kids are on these devices does not mean they're learning, or even learning in the best fashion. Just because the kid is now reading something off the internet and typing it as opposed to reading it out of a book and using handwriting, there's no learning difference there. But when we use these tools well, the world is completely open and anything can happen and things become limitless. But I think often we're using EdTech and we're limiting kids on how we're doing that. So I could get into that, and you're right, we could do an entire podcast on all of that as well. But we need to lead these conversations about student learning first and foremost. Districts have to ask themselves, what are the learning objectives and learning outcomes that I want? And then sure, that device conversation has to take part at some point, but quite often it's more about, well, we want to go one-to-one, and we want to have an iPad for every kid, or we want to have a Chromebook for every kid. But it's a different conversation than where they're learning or their curriculum or what that's looking like. You need to lead with the learning aspect every single time in this conversation. And when I go to conferences and I hear educators talk, they're often leading with the device, and the conversations are more about what type of device they're buying than about how learning's being transformed. And that's an area we need to see a shift.
And you had mentioned the SAMR model, which I highlighted in a recent episode. I believe it was episode number 27, where I kind of preview that as a recommendation, like take a look at this, and it speaks to what you're saying. How are we just going to, how can we transform the learning as opposed to just buy device after device and basically waste our resources?
Yeah, two aspects of that I think are important. One is we have to help teachers understand what high quality digital learning or personalized learning can even look like. It's different. If you've never seen it or you've never been part of it, it's hard to understand what truly transformational digital learning does look like. And on a leadership side, we want to help our principals understand what is it to look for. A lot of times a principal will walk in the room, you have 30 kids sitting on a laptop. Oh, wow, this is great. Digital learning at its finest. And it may not be the case. Just because the kids are on the machine doesn't mean that that's the best environment or it's working well. And so helping them understand, how do we redesign this aspects of learning to get those higher levels, whether you're talking Webb's depth of knowledge or Bloom's taxonomy, to get to those higher levels, because we can do really bad worksheets now online. And I just don't want to see districts move to digital learning and essentially take the worksheets that used to be poor to now have worksheets online that are poor and expect it to make any result from an academic end, because it won't.
Right. It's one thing to have those bad worksheets and graphic organizers on the desk, but to make them available anywhere, anytime, that's not the direction we want to move in, obviously. Now, as this initiative moves forward, what is the next step in the plan for people to move forward with this?
So the next step is we're going to be hosting 12 regional summits around the nation, which these regional summits will be completely free. There is not a single taxpayer dollar that's being sent here. Spent here. It's actually all been privately funded by organizations that just care about kids and want to see this happen. And so these regional summits will be taking place throughout the country. And at each summit, we're going to have 50 to 60 different school district teams come to this summit. So what's going to happen prior to this summit, and one of the resources available free to all school districts, is an online self-assessment with professional learning and taking a look at data and privacy and taking a look at their community partnerships and how they're branding and telling their story as a school, to their curriculum and instruction and what is that looking like and how are they transforming that. And what happens is when they take that self-assessment, 24 hours later, they receive back a 35-page customized report with graphs and charts and resources on and scores on all of the 8 different areas in there. So all the districts before the summits are going to be doing that. So that forces school district leaders to sit together, whether you're the superintendent, the tech director, the curriculum director, the HR person, a teacher, to come together and say, here's where we are as a district. And yes, it's self-reporting, but that is a starting point. And that data is secure and that data is It's not going to be shared with anybody. And that's something actually we at the Alliance hold. That's not held by the U.S. Department of Education purposefully, because we wouldn't want anybody out there to think, oh, is this the department's way to get more information on us as schools? Because it is not that at all. And so we at the Alliance have access to that for them. And with that, they get scores in all of the different areas based on rubrics, based on educational research design, such as a score in professional learning, a score in curriculum instruction and assessment, a score in data privacy. And what that does is that gives them a starting point to start to say, as a district, this is where we need to start our focus. And this is also areas that we can celebrate that we're doing really, really well. So they're going to be coming to these summits, which will be a 2-day summit for leaders. Again, it's going to be free. There's no money here that districts are paying to be at that. We would not want to have money be an issue here. So it is completely privately funded and for free. And so these leaders will come, and for 2 days, we're going to be talking about transformation in all of these different areas. But what's so brilliant about it is all of these different coalition partners are planning these sessions. So on the session that district leaders will be going to for community partnerships, it's the national PTA and other organizations like that are planning that session and then saying, here's the best of our resources. When we take a look at the professional learning session, there's ISTE and some of the other professional learning type organizations coming together and saying, well, let's provide our best resources. So these will be a culmination of resources for schools after they do the self-assessment as a starting point at the summit. When they leave that summit, they're going to have an action plan for their school district for over the next school year. How are you going to help transform yourself? How are you going to transform your curriculum and instruction and assessment looking forward? Because what we're doing, Chris, is we're helping them plan before they buy. It is not going to be come to this summit, oh, buy iPads or oh, buy Chromebook. I hope the word iPad or Chromebook, and I love those. They're great tools. I'm not talking down about those companies at all, but I hope at this summits they never once are mentioned. Because it is not about the tool. It is about the planning. It is about the process to get that vehicle to be able to work at all. And so at those summits, district leadership teams will formulate a plan, an action plan for their district moving forward. After that, we're providing resources for at least a year for those school districts and other districts that may not be attending the summits to tap into, all completely free. We've had some organizations and companies out there, for-profit companies, step up and sponsor some of these to say, you know what, we believe in this and we want to support. So AT&T is an example of that. They are an example of an organization that said, we're going to help support that. Here's essentially a check to create what you're looking to do, and to be able to just, at the end of the day, support kids. So those resources are going to be in a data dashboard systems that school districts can use. So it'll take their district self-assessment. The information will then be in there. And this data dashboard will help them analyze the gaps that they see in their school districts. And then it will customize resources from all the different coalition partners and all the other things that are out there, from rubrics and charts and case studies and online resources, to help them in a customized way support the work in their school district. And again, it is for free for districts. It is not taxpayer funded. And so all of that will help support. So let me give you a specific example. If I'm a district that sees a gap in professional learning, that self-assessment will identify that gap. Districts can then dive into a self-assessment just in professional learning that gets really, really deep. It will then customize, well, here's 10 resources to start you out. Here's a couple case studies. Here's some areas that professional learning has been transformed. Here's some literature. Here's some online resources, and all of that pulled from all the different coalition partners and other resources that are out there. And then that information is customized for school districts so that they have things in a one-stop shop. One of the things what I noticed when I went from a public school district in Pennsylvania to Washington is there are so many different organizations out there that as a school district leader, I had no idea were even out there. And they've got great resources, but I didn't know they were there. So this is going to really be a one-stop shop to help point districts in different directions based on what they need. It's not just here's every resource to every district and it's completely overwhelming. It's, okay, if your resources are in these couple of areas and you scored in these areas, these are the best resources that we're recommending. And look at the partner of 30 different partner organizations, the group of 30 different organizations that have worked together to compile and support you in this regard. So a year from now, we want to see districts that not only have have an action plan, because we do that a lot in education. We plan, we create these great documents, and then we do nothing with it. We want to see districts that are well on their way to transformation, to better empower teachers and to get higher results for kids, because we have kids thinking differently and collaborating and problem solving. The kids sitting in our schools today are the people and the kids that are going to have to take care of us when we're old. So we better do this right. We better make sure they are the future of our nation, and we don't have time to screw up. One of the things that I've heard, the pushback to Future Ready is, it's not about the future, it's about right now. And I understand where those educators are coming from, and I agree, it is about right now, but we need to plan really, really well so we don't screw up the right now. And so part of it is about planning, because we do want to do this quickly. We don't want to say, we're going to plan for the next 10 years and then figure it out. We want to plan really, really well and make sure that districts are planning systemically to do this well before they go spend the millions of dollars on the stuff. And then when you get the stuff, you have a plan and understanding of what to actually do with it to do it effectively.
Now, let me see if I can kind of recap or kind of summarize this the way my mind works. And this is, I guess, rooted in curriculum. When a district writes curriculum, it should be independent of any textbook or resource. You shouldn't design a class or a course based on the book that company X wants to sell my district. Good with me so far?
I am. I think you'll have some people that don't understand education that would struggle to follow that, because a lot of times they would think my math curriculum is my math textbook. I completely agree with you in that regard, that we want to start with the high standards, whether they're the Common Core, whether the college and career standards that a state has adopted, kind of as that starting point. And yes, I'm with you and I'm following you. Go ahead.
Okay. So then with Future Ready, it's almost like a really big curriculum. And I was going to say big, and I don't feel like bleeping my own podcast, but it's a really big curriculum where it's independent of any resource, but it's the pedagogical way of thinking about education. And once we nail that down, now we can bring in the iPad, the device, the textbook, whatever resource can help support that in learning. Do I understand?
Yeah, absolutely. Because the concept of Future Ready is massive. It is complete school transformation. It's having an in-depth understanding of things like privacy. Back when I testified in front of Congress in June on something like privacy, there were not a whole lot of school districts, besides a few people in each district, talking about things like data privacy for kids and what does that look like. Well, that has exploded in 35 out of 50 states currently have bills taking a look at that, and that can absolutely have an impact on what teachers are doing in the classroom. And we don't want to see that overarch into the classroom and start to limit resources that teachers can use. But things like privacy are areas that not every district, it's not on the front burner for every district, but it absolutely needs to be, because the privacy of our children is absolutely imperative, but the data that we need to do to drive instruction on a daily basis is imperative as well. And so it'll help districts think through things like that may not be on the front burners, but we need them to be, so that they don't get burned down the road.
Absolutely. And no superintendent wants to sign something and get burned later on. Now, Tom, you've spoken a lot about Future Ready, and you mentioned the website, but what now can my listeners do to take what you've said and now go and run with it? What can they do?
First and foremost, continue the conversation and encourage people down the hall or at the heads of your school or your superintendents to have these conversations. What is it that we believe student learning should look like, and how do we get there? Use our resource, futurereadyschools.org. Again, there is no cost to this. To see the incredible resources, and we link out to all of our different coalition partners. Help spread the word. Ask your superintendent, hey, have you taken the pledge? And if they kind of look at you a little bit curious, the Future Ready Schools pledge, have you taken that? And ask them why or why not. And if they haven't, ask them why not. See what the rationale or what the reasoning, or maybe they don't know about it. So helping to spread the word with this would be awesome. Continuing to tap in and share resources that are here, and to recommend resources. There's ways that they can reach out and share those as well. To encourage their districts to take a self-assessment and see where is it that they stand. A lot of times we as districts districts make so many different decisions without really knowing our baseline or where we are. We wouldn't do that in the classroom or instruction, so we shouldn't be doing that as a district as well. So for any educators that are out there, check out futurereadyschools.org. You can also find us on Facebook, on Twitter at FutureReady. And I encourage you to link up to that. We'll be continually sharing different resources, information that comes out of the summit. So you can help by continuing the conversation. You can help by pushing your district leadership to make really good decisions for kids. And this is one way and one initiative that can help train them to do that. And you can also help at the end of the day by being a really, really effective teacher in the classroom, because that's really what this comes down to, is we need the best of the best teachers transforming the lives of kids, because that's where the rubber hits the road, is in the classroom. And that's where we really, really need to focus.
Absolutely, Tom. And I do want to thank you for coming on today to talk about Future Ready. And before I let you go, since we have a little bit of time, because, well, it's a podcast, you're also an author. Talk a little bit about your new book that, depending on when I put this interview out, may or may not have come out yet, Leading Professional Learning, Tools to Connect and Empower Teachers.
Thanks, Chris, for asking that. It was a fun book to write. My co-author, Jeff Zoll, who's a best-selling author, he's written a lot with author Todd Whitaker, if you're familiar with Todd and Jeff. Jeff and I are both very, very passionate about professional learning. And how many times in the podcast did I say the words professional learning? I believe the quality of a district's outcome, whether it is achievement or whatnot, will be a direct result based on the quality of professional learning. And where it really came from is I believe that we have a crisis when it comes to professional learning in schools, where for our staff. You know, when we take a look at what our states are requiring, when we take a look at what our district's requiring, it's all about seat time. And when we're measuring seat time, we're measuring the wrong end of the learner. So this book is to help teachers empower themselves, to give them resources of here's how you can get connected. Here's resources that are out there. Here's great podcasts, great webinars, great ways to connect with other teachers around the world. For our leaders that are out there, we make the case for a school district transformation. In my previous district, and part of the heart of where I thought long and hard about writing a book like this, we did things like get rid of all required hours for teachers. And we wanted to find ways to empower teachers for that teacher voice. Because I bet if you ask the average teacher in our country where their voice is in the professional learning process in their school district, most of them would probably give you a head tilt, kind of like huh? What do you mean? But we need teachers that are empowered. We need teachers in districts that believe in their best resource, and that's their teachers. Where we have teachers. In my former district, what we transformed it to was we would send out to teachers, what is it that you need to learn, and what is it you can help others learn? And if we had to have a day, we had a handful of days still spread out throughout the year, we would have it pretty much teacher driven. And we might have a 140 session run by 140 teachers and conversations and whatnot. And so as a district, we stood behind them and empowered them, as opposed to saying everybody across the board is doing this from 9 to 10 and really not giving them a voice in the process. So our book that is coming out is to help empower teachers, to help leaders understand how can you personalize professional learning for your staff? How can you encourage your staff? And for our leaders, how are you being transparent with your own learning? Because leaders that are leading a school and it's saying you need to do this and you need this amount of hours and this is what you need to go to, and it's not a we and here's what I'm doing and here's something that I learned and here's a blog post that I wrote that I'm making myself vulnerable. Leaders that are doing that are transformative and transparent with their own learning are engaging teachers in their buildings and encouraging and empowering teachers to do the same. And so we're trying to empower teachers, and we're also trying to take the leaders and help them be transparent with their own learning, because at the end of the day, we need really, really good teachers. And the only way we're going to get there is through high quality, personalized professional learning, not a top down, sit and get, let's herd teachers like cattle into a room, talk at them for 2 hours and call it professional learning, but a model that's more coaching based and teacher voice and the ability for teachers to make decisions about their own learning. You know, we trust teachers with the lives of children every day, yet we often don't trust them to be part of the professional learning conversation, and we need to change that. And hopefully our book can help paint a roadmap for just that.
I certainly hope it does, because everything you just said is what I advocate for. Empowering and entrusting us is something I've spoken a lot about this year to my colleagues and in previous episodes of the podcast. So before the book has come out, thank you for writing and putting that information and that point of view out there. I think it's crucial.
I would wrap up by saying, it relates to the book, and one of the analogies that we make is high quality professional learning in a school district models a high functioning and high quality classroom. And in that classroom, you have students that are empowered. You have student voice that matters. You're differentiating or you're personalizing to meet the various needs. In a non-personalized environment in your traditional school district, you're treating the 30-year veteran and the first-year teacher with the same paintbrush, and they just need very different things quite often. There's times where they may need the same, but we need to personalize for that, and the book helps to do that. So thanks for the shout on the book. I appreciate that, but we had a lot of fun writing it as well.
Excellent. And actually, that last point you just made, by painting people with different brushes instead of the same brush, they tell us to do that as teachers with our students. Don't paint everybody with the same brush. And yet, what is done to us sometimes with our own learning.
Yeah,
Great point.
You're spot on with that. Another analogy we often make, and I believe we make in the book as well, is, professional learning days for those districts that do it in that fashion, which I would say would be most of them, is a great way for school district leaders to model what they expect teachers to do in the classroom. And I would say for our principals, the way they run faculty meetings is a fabulous way to model what we want to see in the classroom. But I would make the argument that it's not often the case of what we do see. There's story after story of awesome principals and district leaders that are transforming this stuff, that do it really well and being really high octane models for our teachers. But many times it's the opposite of that, where teachers do not feel empowered, so they are not engaged. And then at the end of the day, they turn to their classroom and they hear more of what they needed to do that their leaders just did not model. And it really is hypocritical, in my opinion. But we can do this, and we're going to do this because our kids deserve it and our future of our country needs it.
Well said, Mr. Murray. Well said. Now, you're a busy guy. You're shaping education for the entire United States, which I thank you for your service. Now, how can people, when you have time, I know you're very busy, how can my audience reach out to you and pick your brain further? Where can they get in touch with you?
Sure. I'd love to connect on Twitter. I'm a huge advocate of being a connected educator because together we are better for our children, and our children deserve that. So you can connect with me on Twitter at Thomas C. Murray. You can also connect with me online. My website is thomascmurray.com. And I do work with school districts and those kinds of things on digital learning implementation and helping them plan for progress and helping them be able to get there. So I would encourage people to reach out that are looking for support. And it's part of what I enjoy doing, because at the end of the day, we are all here to serve children, and I want to help districts do just that.
Thank you so much for coming on, Tom. And the next time I have you on, maybe we can dive into actually what you do as a consultant for districts.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Anytime. Appreciate you having me on today.
Thanks again to Tom for taking the time to be on the podcast. And if you're not connected with Tom, you really need to connect with him on Twitter and check out his website and reach out to him. He's really great to talk to. He's easy to talk to. And as he mentioned, he wants to talk to people and make those connections. So I think that's really important. So take advantage of it, especially when he puts himself out there. Before we get to my EdTech thought, I do want to take a moment to thank the sponsor for this episode. And again, that is Today's Meet. Today's Meet is a great website that you can use to introduce back-channeling into your classroom. Now, if you're not familiar with back-channeling, that is you're teaching or you're presenting and there's a conversation taking place in the room that you're aware of, but the conversation doesn't interrupt what you're doing. Today's Meet is a great, secure, private platform that works a lot like Twitter, but it's not Twitter, and it gives you a lot more benefits. One of the really hot benefits right now of Today's Meet is Today's Meet's teacher tools. So for $5 a month, you can basically set up these private chat rooms that you can save for an hour, a day, a year, different periods of time, have the transcripts so you can kind of monitor and police how you're using it. If you're using it with students, students can be held accountable for what they're saying, and a record of what's being said can be, captured and kept for records. So I think that's really useful. So I really recommend that you check out todaysmeet.com. I've been using it for, almost 2 years now, and I really like what they're doing over there, and I think it would be great to use in your classroom as well. If you'd like to check it out, head over to todaysmeet.com/House of EdTech. And now, let's check out my EdTech thought. My EdTech thought in this episode, I'm calling the pencil metaphor. I first came across the pencil metaphor back in August of 2014 on the website teachthought.com, and I will link back to the original post in the show notes for this episode. Now, just for a second, in your mind's eye, wherever you are right now, I want you to imagine a pencil with an eraser and like one of those clips that you would put on a lanyard or stick in your pocket if you had a chest pocket. Put the eraser to your left and the point of the pencil on your right. And right now we're going to work from left to right. So 6 ways that teachers respond to education technology. The way the metaphor works is as follows. Number 1, you have the hangers-on. This is the clip of the pencil. Hangers-on people, they know all the right lingo, they attend all the right seminars, but they just don't do anything. I hope you're not that person. Please don't be that person. Number 2, the eraser. Think of the eraser on that pencil. These are the people who endeavor to undo much, if not all of the work done by the leaders. So these are the naysayers. These are the policymakers who aren't allowing us to do what we feel is necessary, or they come in and they change what we're doing, even though it's working and good for kids. The third part, the ferals. These people hang on tightly to what they know. They keep a strong grip on their traditional practices and feel that there is not a place for technology in their classroom. I'm not going to lie, I really don't like these people. There is a place for technology in the classroom. Well, let me back up. It's not that I don't like these people. I don't like that if this is your mentality. Now, I like to think if you're listening to this podcast, that this isn't your mentality. So hopefully it's not. But let's move on. Number 4, the wooden part of the pencil. These people would get it. They would get technology if someone would just get them the gear, set it up, train them, and keep it running. All these people need is help from some sharp person, and they would be doing it too. So that brings us to the sharp ones. These are the people that see what the early adopters have done. They willingly grab the best of it, and they learn from the mistakes of others, and they do great stuff with their students. Hopefully you're a sharp one. I like to think of myself as a leader, but I know there are a lot of leaders out there, and any sharp one, or really anybody, can become a leader. And these are the people that are first to take on the technology. These are the early adopters, and they usually document and they enthusiastically share what they have tried, good, bad, and different, warts and all. So, based on the pencil metaphor, where are you? Are you a hangers-on? Are you an eraser? A ferrule? Are you the wood? Are you a sharp one? Or are you a leader? I'd love your feedback, and I'd love to know where you believe that you fall on this metaphor. Send your feedback. Hit me up on Twitter. The username is Mr. Nesi, MrNesi, and also send an email to me, feedback@chrisnesi.com. I'd love to know where you fall on the pencil. And now it's time for the House of EdTech VIP. This episode's VIP is Robert Zywicki. Robert Zywicki is the Director of Curriculum, Instruction, and Technology of the High Point Regional School District here in New Jersey. He has led High Point to become a Google Apps for Education district, as well as a BYOD campus. Robert is also the organizer of the High Point Summit, featuring Google for Education. He's also the author of a soon-to-be-published book titled Going 100% Google Apps in 6 Months, a Guide for Educational Leaders. And he's also an active presenter. He presents on such topics that include best practices of instructional design, executive functioning, and the holistic approach to child development. Additionally, Robert is also an adjunct at Rutgers University's Graduate School of Education Center for Effective School Practices, and he also adjuncts at St. Peter's University School of Education. He's dedicated to fostering individualized excellence for all students. Be sure to check out the show notes for this episode, because I've also included links to some of the great articles written by or about Robert's role in education. One is Twitter, an invaluable tool for teachers' professional development. New Jersey schools go BYOD, students get the green light to use cell phones in class. And the third article that I've linked to is titled Interdistrict School Choice, a Win-Win. Robert is the VIP, and you need to connect with him. He's on Twitter, and his username is ZywickiR, and that is ZYWICKIR. ICKIR. Congratulations, Robert. You are the House of EdTech VIP. And that's going to do it for this episode of the House of EdTech, sponsored by Today's Meet. Be sure to check out todaysmeet.com/House of EdTech. I hope you enjoyed the conversation I had with Tom Murray and the House of EdTech recommendation, and I hope that you do connect with Mr. Zawicki and keep the conversation going. Visit my website, chrisnesi.com, that's CHRISNESI.com, where you can review the show notes for this episode. Again, this is number 28. And I would love your thoughts on the information and resources shared in this episode. Leave a comment on the show notes or email me at the show, and the email address is feedback@chrisnesi.com. You can also submit audio feedback by calling the House of EdTech listener feedback line, and the number is 732-903-4869. Or you can connect on Voxer. My username is cnesi4602. And obviously connect with me on Twitter. My username is Mr. Nessie, MRNESI, and anything you want to send related to the podcast, just use the hashtag House of EdTech. If you enjoyed the House of EdTech, and I don't see why you wouldn't, please rate and review the podcast in iTunes. Your 5-star rating and positive review will help keep the House of EdTech front and center for others to discover and enjoy. You can also show your support through patreon.com and visit Patreon, that's patreon.com/House of EdTech, where if you'd like to contribute to the show, you're more than welcome to do so. And I'd like to thank Jeff Herb of the Instructional Tech Talk podcast, who is a patron of the show. Thank you so much, Jeff. I appreciate your contribution. And in the next episode of the House of EdTech, I will be speaking to Courtney Kofeld. She's a technology coordinator and teacher for the completely online Pennsylvania Leadership Charter School. I'm looking forward to sharing that conversation and the many more conversations that are going to be coming up here in 2015. As always, thank you for listening, and remember, using technology isn't difficult. Just give it a try.